Chapter 9. Dreams Must Die. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. Matthew 16:25. Though that is what Jesus said. There, alone on the balcony, the princess spent several hours in thought and in prayer. She loved the peaceful feeling of the west balcony covered with vines, sweet peas, and ivy. It seemed like her own private place outdoors, yet nearly indoors. She had so many memories of special times of prayer she had enjoyed there alone, admiring the view of the mountains and talking with the one who had created them. As she listened to the birds and felt the gentle breeze, she was vividly reminded of what she already knew, that her life was not her own, for she had been bought with a price. In that still and quiet moment, she made an important decision in her heart. She determined that regardless of the cost, she must take the higher road. With renewed zeal, she once again dedicated her life, her time, and her future to her Heavenly Father and to whatever work He saw fit to give her. Joyfully, she returned to the palace, anxious to tell her father of her decision, not only to remain home from the merchant's fest, but more importantly, to serve her master with a greater fervor than ever before. The princess had yet to learn that when one struggle is overcome, the next one is usually just around the corner. For as she hurried through the courtyard, instead of finding her father, she encountered the last person she ever would have expected. It was, as you may have guessed, Sir Valiant. He had finished a lengthy conversation with her father and was just mounting his horse to depart from the castle, dedicated in his service for the king. The princess stopped suddenly. Then she quickly smiled and cheerfully exclaimed, "Oh, hello!" Though her voice was calm, her heart was trembling, and dozens of questions raced through her mind. What shall I say? Shall I introduce myself? Why is he here? Does he know who I am? Her anxiousness was forgotten, however, when Valiant dismounted his horse, returned her greeting, and said, "Oh, and you must be the king's daughter. I have heard so much about you. Many in the village speak of thy virtue and kindness." The princess laughed and replied, "Oh, well, I have heard about you as well. My father says thou art among his most trustworthy knights. He deeply values thy loyal service." The princess thought that Sir Valiant looked more handsome and radiant than ever as he stood there in the bright sunlight. In reality, if she could have seen herself, she would have been equally surprised to see the brightness of her own face. It is perhaps a good thing that the princess did not realize that her beauty was only becoming more and more radiant with time. The two of them did not talk long, but as the princess waved good-bye and watched him ride away, she felt as if her heart would burst. She had never felt that way before. She turned away and floated, well, almost, into the palace to see the king. In her excitement, the princess had forgotten the news she had planned to tell her father about her commitment to dedicate her life anew to her heavenly king. A host of new thoughts were now rushing through her mind. She nearly ran over her father as she entered the palace and found him speaking with her mother. The king smiled and seemed to already guess what the princess was thinking. She asked him about, she asked him all about Sir Valiant, why he had come, when he would be back, how long he had been serving in the king's army, and where he was from. She wanted to ask many more questions, whether the king would like him for a son-in-law, whether they had spoken of her, and whether he was courting anyone else, but she thought it better to say nothing. The princess was excited all week, wondering when Sir Valiant might return and if she might be able to get to know him better. But soon the reality of daily life began to set in, and she started to wonder why she had been so quick to imagine that he was the one for her. Surely she had been foolish to entertain such thoughts. Diligently the princess gave herself to eternal things. sewing clothes for the poor, spending time with orphans, representing her father at important gatherings, and providing much hospitality for guests and ambassadors visiting the castle. But once again the princess found herself growing tired of waiting. The months seemed to drag by slowly, and she sometimes found herself discouraged. What am I even waiting for? She wondered. Is it possible, as the alligator has so often said, that I am waiting for a dream that will never come true? After finishing dinner one cloudy evening, the princess decided to take a walk along the path that went past the courtyard, through the vineyard, and along the edge of the forest outside the castle. So many questions troubled her. So many fears found their way into her thoughts. She remembered the afternoon out on the balcony only 6 months earlier. She had been so excited about living each day to the fullest, so determined to be content no matter what. Now it felt as if she had been waiting forever. But Sir Valiant was so handsome and perfect. How could she help but notice him? All her dreams rushed back fresh and new. Love letters, romantic walks by starlight, a diamond ring, a glorious wedding, staring into her prince's eyes, being held tightly in his arms, being a mother, and oh, her longings were almost too overwhelming for her to bear. Hearing soft footsteps, she turned around and saw her mother walking behind her. The princess waited but said nothing, telling herself that she was determined not to start crying. Her mother seemed to already know how she was feeling, as mothers usually do, and gently asked if everything was all right. The princess was silent for a few moments and then began to speak slowly. Years ago, I decided that I had a purpose in life much bigger than marriage, and that I would gladly stay single if my Heavenly Father asked this of me. Time after time I have prayed for His will to be done and purposed to be content. And just when I thought I had finally understood contentment, just when I thought I had finally learned how to be patient, to patiently wait, Sir Valiant came to visit and and made everything harder. I just don't understand why I can't learn to trust and am so easily distracted, and why, she concluded with a sigh, does this have to be so difficult? Struggles are a necessary part of life, her mother said. They strengthen us and prepare us for the new trials that lie ahead. When one struggle is overcome, another is often around the next bend. I suppose. But, Mother, I feel like I'm failing in each struggle, not overcoming them. Thou art growing. Thou art learning. These are the very things the struggle is designed to accomplish in thy life. Do not forget, dear daughter, that except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Bear fruit. That is exactly what I want to do, the princess said quietly, as if in deep thought. Then your dream must die. But my dream is a good dream, not a bad dream. It is the dream God has given me. It is nothing wicked I desire, but only what is natural, wholesome, and beautiful. Why must it die? Her mother stepped off the path, knelt down, picked up an acorn, and explained. Observe this acorn, perfectly designed for what it is intended to do. Die. The acorn does not know why. The acorn does not understand what is ahead, but only if it is buried in the cold and dark earth, forgotten and left alone, does it fulfill its purpose and become what it was created to be. Would the acorn ever have imagined that it would become the beautiful oak tree you see before you? Not in its wildest dreams. When you admire the oak tree, do you mourn the loss of the acorn? Of course not. By losing its life, the acorn became something so much greater, so much more beautiful, so much more valuable. The death is forgotten. The fruit is remembered. Nevertheless, death was required. So this little section right here reminds me of something that I have been focusing on lately. Just that whole idea of letting a dream die. Sometimes when we have dreams that, even though they're good, but we put too much emphasis and expectation on them and comfort and all that, then what we really have created is not a dream but an idol. And when we have an idol that is anything other than God Himself, then we are not worshiping Him the way He tells us to. So that is our little story about the princess. We'll take a break for myself, and then we will get into the rest of the chapter. Intense desires. I was sitting in the living room when my 14-year-old brother Stephen walked in and out of the blue brought up one of his favorite discussion topics, new computer equipment. "You know, Sarah," he commented, "for me, getting a laptop would be like you getting married." A little surprised by his analogy, I looked up from whatever I was doing and said, I wouldn't quite make that comparison, but what makes you say that?" "Well," Stephen continued, "getting a laptop is something I've always looked forward to, and I won't be able to believe it if it actually happens." "But, Stephen, what about you getting married?" I asked. "Sarah, that would be like you getting a laptop," he responded. Stephen walked out of the room, and I sat there smiling. Even though I'm not sure I agree with Stephen's analogy, he was right about one thing. The Lord has given young ladies the desire to be married. This is a good desire, a God-given desire. Most of us will get married one day, and we can be grateful that the Lord has given us a longing for the very thing He has called us to do. All the same, marriage is not our ultimate goal. A husband is not what will make us happy, and marriage is not what will bring true fulfillment in life. Even girls who are very young are often led to believe that a boyfriend is what will make them happy. One hot summer day, I was having a conversation with a friend in my neighborhood. I was 11 years old and she was 9. The Lord had been working in my life that summer, and I wanted to tell my friend about Jesus. "Let's go for a walk, Hannah," I suggested. As I was walking beside her, squinting in the bright sunlight and trying to keep the conversation going, I was silently asking myself, what can I say? I want to witness, but how? Finally, I thought of a question to ask her. "What do you want more than anything else in the world, Hannah?" I said. She paused a moment and then confidently answered, "A boyfriend." This sort of caught me by surprise. After all, I was only 11 and she was only 9. She thought a boyfriend would bring happiness and meaning to her life. Even though she was young, she knew her life was missing something, and she was looking for fulfillment. She needed to know that Jesus Christ was the only one who could fill that void in her heart. In the same way, when we have unfulfilled longings in our lives, we often look in the wrong places for help. We think that happiness will be found when all our wants have been obtained. Thus, we spend our lives attempting to have our desires met, our dreams fulfilled, and our wishes come to pass. But instead of seeking after these wants, the Lord gives us some radically different guidance. As usual, God's thinking and the world's thinking are exactly opposite. The world says, follow your dreams. Seek whatever will make you happy. Follow your heart. God says, surrender everything and count it gain. Luke 14:33 and 18:29 through 30. The world says, you deserve to get what you want. God says, whoever loses his life finds it. Matthew 16:25. And not in our book, but true, the world tells you to follow your heart. But I believe it's Jeremiah 17:9 that says, that the heart is deceitful above all else. So if we're following our heart, we are very likely to be led astray. As single young ladies, it's important to realize that a husband will not make us happy, nor is marriage a right that God is supposed to give us. Marriage is a gift. Moreover, our purpose in getting married must not be to get, but rather to give. While we are on this earth, we will always experience unfulfilled longings. Romans 8:23. God intends for these desires to draw us to Himself. The Lord knows that He is the only one who can satisfy our hearts. He completes us. He wants us to know and experience the reality that He is enough. He desires that we learn unconditional surrender. The greatest exchange. Riding home in our minivan, I could hardly stop talking about my ideas. I leaned forward in the back seat and tried to explain all my new thoughts to Mom and Dad, talking loudly in order to be heard over the sound of our noisy van and my energetic siblings. Our family was on the way home from a conference where I had been asked to share about the Bright Lights ministry. I had been overwhelmed by the response of many young ladies who had talked with me afterwards, and was very surprised to hear that so many other girls were interested in beginning a Bright Lights group in their area. I was 21 years old at the time. Up to this point, there were no other Bright Lights groups except for the 3 that I was leading. Suddenly, I realized that the Lord was opening new doors and expanding this ministry to girls. Not only was God generating interest in others, He was giving me an excitement and vision for what was ahead. I was flooded with ideas. First of all, there was a need for discipleship materials for mothers and daughters. There was also a need for resources for leaders and training conferences for older girls. In addition, I could see mother-daughter conferences as a way to reach young ladies on a wider scale. And, well, there seemed to be no end to the possibilities that the Lord might have in store. I was so excited about what God was doing, I could hardly think about anything else. As the weeks went by, I began to realize that some of my ideas were rather unrealistic and that many obstacles had to be overcome. I began to wonder whether all these ideas were really from the Lord or just my own dreams. I began to search my heart and evaluate whether my motive was truly to reach young ladies or to gain something for myself. I desperately wanted to want only what the Lord wanted, but I was confused. My dreams seemed to be from the Lord, yet I also knew how easily prideful and selfish motives could creep in. I distinctly remember one day, just a few weeks later, when I got on my knees and made a list of all my ideas and dreams for Bright Lights, every little desire and every big dream. I put them all on my list. Then one by one I surrendered them to the Lord, asking that He would purify my heart and use me to accomplish His purposes, not my own. Finally, I ripped up the paper and asked the Lord to exchange my dreams with His will, whatever it might be. I still had a strong desire to minister to young ladies, and I still felt that the Lord was leading me to pursue the vision He had given. But I also knew that if the Lord's plans were different than mine, He could be trusted. Even if none of my ideas came to pass, I was resolved to put my whole heart into His assignments and follow His leading. Several years later, it suddenly dawned on me that every single one of those dreams had come to pass. And even more exciting to me was the fact that dozens of other ministry opportunities that had never been even crossed my mind had also been part of the Lord's bigger plan. Waiting was involved, but God's timing was definitely different than mine. In fact, some things that I hoped would happen immediately took nearly 5 years. But in hindsight, it is clear that God sees the whole picture and writes the last chapter. Surrender is a daily part of the Christian life. The Lord is jealous for us with a godly jealousy, and desires to have the first place in every area of our hearts. He will quickly ask us to surrender any possession, person, interest, career, activity, or dream that begins to take priority. Sometimes he gives our dreams back, sometimes he doesn't. It is his intense love, his desire for our ultimate happiness, and his understanding of what will bring forth the most fruit that necessitates this pruning, which may appear to us as unmerciful, unfair, and painful. There are many things besides my goals for Bright Lights that the Lord has asked me to surrender. I have found this same exercise of writing a list of dreams and ripping it up helpful in the area of marriage. One day, several years ago, I wrote out every dream I could think of, from the smallest little desires, such as romantic evening, to the biggest desires, such as being a mother and raising children. And after specifically surrendering each dream to the Lord, I ripped up the list, telling the Lord that I wanted to exchange my dreams with His will, no matter what this might entail. His will is infinitely better than my dream. It might not be what I would choose. It might not include marriage, but it is better. In fact, it is so much better that it is not even worthy to be compared with my finite viewpoint, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 17 through 18. In Philippians 3:8, Paul says, "Yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I may win Christ." Shattered dreams. A confused 21-year-old girl thought frequently about the man she loved. But did he love her? They had dated for 3 years. He had asked her to marry him. She had joyfully agreed. The wedding date was set. And then her dreams were shattered. He had changed his mind. Or at least he had changed his mind for the time being. He said he still loved her, but he wasn't ready to get married. He postponed the wedding. Worst of all, he postponed it indefinitely. She had no idea when he would actually decide, if ever. She might be waiting for the rest of her life. With embarrassment, this young woman called off her wedding plans. Then she wondered what she should do next. She couldn't just sit around waiting for him to decide. So she took a job teaching at a Christian school. She left him in Indiana, took off her engagement ring, and moved to Florida. As the months went by, the waiting got harder. She was still in love, but was her love returned? She wasn't sure. As she continued to struggle, she finally realized that she couldn't go through the rest of her life like this, just waiting, wondering, and worrying. One evening she got down on her knees and began to pray. With tears, she surrendered her dreams, her future, and this young man to the Lord. She purposed to trust the Lord's plan no matter what, and to say, "Not my will, but thine be done." She stood up, and just a few minutes later the phone rang. It was him. He had decided to get married at last. The plans were made. The wedding day arrived. They said, "I do." Eventually, they had a baby. Me. It wasn't until my mother surrendered to the Lord her desire to marry that He answered her prayers and gave her the godly husband she had longed for. It is not only our sin and wrong desires that God asks us to give up. He asks for everything, every part of our heart, every area of our life. Since He wants to have first place, the Lord will ask us to surrender anything that hinders our relationship with Him. It is not just the big areas He requests, but also the very smallest. A life of surrender is the sweetest one possible, while a life of stubbornness and unwillingness to yield is the most miserable. Yet so many times we are slow to submit and to enter into the freedom and rest God wants to give. When the sacrifice seems hard, pause and remember the one to whom you are surrendering. Don't dwell on your personal sacrifice, but rather consider the perfect faithfulness, loving kindness, power, and beauty of the one who alone can satisfy us completely. Consider what he has given for us. Consider how much he deserves. When our mind is stayed upon him, surrender becomes an act of pure joy. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. Matthew 13:44. In an email I received recently, my friend shared with me the freedom that comes from simply surrendering to the Lord. I am so excited to see how God is blessing me as I've been surrendering to Him and letting Him be in control of things. I don't know, maybe it is that for so long I've been trying to handle things on my own. Now I can see that even when I thought I was surrendering, I'd been trying to run the show. I have so much more joy and freedom now that I've had for a long time. And I haven't really made any huge sacrifices or anything. It's just that the little areas of life that I was trying to handle on my own, I am now learning to simply leave in His hands. You know, Sarah, I find that in the big struggles, I tend to count on the Lord more because I know that I'm not able to do it on my own. But in the small things that I think I should be able to handle, I forget to keep counting on Him. But I need Him just as much in the small stuff, especially if I want to be living a life that is totally glorifying to Him. Let me check my peas on the stove. I'll be right back. When dying is true living. If you were asked to die for your faith, would you be willing to lay down your life? I assume that most of us would say we'd be willing to die for Christ. Yet I fear that we are not so willing to live for Christ. If we die today, we'd never have the opportunity to get married, raise a family, or see any of our other earthly dreams come to pass. We would understand this to be part of the sacrifice. We would have given our lives. That would mean everything. Yet, are we willing to live our lives on earth and still sacrifice these same dreams and desires? Are we willing to joyfully stay single if that is what God asks us to do? To die to self? To count everything a loss in order to gain Christ? Oftentimes we are quick to say we'll surrender in the big things. Lord, I'll go anywhere for you, even to the jungles of Africa. But when it comes to the little daily things such as surrendering our friendships, forgiving a neighbor, or yielding what we want to do in order to serve others, we're not so ready to submit. If the Lord asks us to sacrifice our best years for Him, if He asks us to wait when it seems that every other girl at church has a boyfriend, if He asks us to never be married, are we willing? Any sacrifice we make for the Lord is not a loss, but a gain. We have been called to die that we might truly live, to lose our life that we might win it, to decrease that He might increase, and to surrender that we might gain the ultimate victory. After all, we are not our own. We have been bought with a price. Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, Why hast thou made me thus? Hath not the potter power over the clay? Romans 9:20 and 21. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. John 12:24. Suggested memory verse. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. Matthew 16:25. Suggested assignment. Have some time alone with the Lord to specifically discuss with Him your dreams. Ask Him to purify your heart and direct your steps. Surrender any areas that you have been holding back for yourself. Acknowledge that you desire to do His will rather than your own. As you surrender particular dreams, habits, activities, friendships, possessions, and plans, I'd encourage you to get out a journal and express your thoughts on paper. Write a letter to the Lord explaining your decision, yielding your will, and expressing your desire to be in complete submission to Him. Be specific in your letter as you discuss each area of struggle and lay it down at His feet. When you are tempted to take back areas you have previously surrendered, you can look back through your journal and be reminded of your decision and of how the Lord has worked in your heart.